Hi, so this is hi. This is a video I'd like to make a little 10-minute thing, introducing a set of ideas that I'm calling neurodiverse recovery. It came out of my experience post-brain rehab over the last 9 years in trying to grab once my brain could sync up inner meaning and outside language, and I was stable again and out the streets and had a home and was safe and establishing care and eventually got with the VA. I was able to begin grappling with trauma and also with my 12-step recovery. By the time I went through brain rehab, I had been sober for 21 years. And so when I synced things up, it was really jarring, and it took me a long time it was very slow for months. I would just go to the brain rehab and come home and, I only went to brain rehab for about a month because there wasn't much they could do, but I would stay home and I'd go out a little bit into the world and come home and process my experiences quietly where I was staying. And it took me a while to be having things happen and find my words for it, have feelings that happen and find my words for it, see if I trusted that. I trusted my understanding, trusted how to engage with professionals about services on my own, because for decades before I had gone out on the streets and eventually gotten into brain rehab, I had been misdiagnosed and treated as a mental patient and had case managers and service people to do all the things for me. It was very hard for me to understand and learn my way of doing the different things and trusting my process of understanding and expressing myself. So I remained physically sober for all that time, and a lot of things happened after brain rehab. I wandered, like I couldn't find permanent housing, and I wandered back across the United States, back east, and eventually ended up back in Rochester. And I got back into care, but in grappling with my recovery life, when my brain synced back up and I was stable in housing again, I did not really understand what my recovery meant, because the understanding I'd had for all the decades between the brain rehab and then getting sober, and then years later going through brain rehab and finally being able to put my thoughts together, was that my understanding, my recovery had been based all those years on an understanding of what my condition was in terms of addiction and alcoholism, my spirituality, morality, all of those, my senses, my emotions, my beliefs, my thoughts, my sensations, experiences, relationships, all that stuff had been based on a way of thinking that I now knew wasn't real, because it had been based on the understanding that I made up to try to cope with what had happened to me when I fell and didn't know that I'd sustained a brain injury. I guessed what had happened to me and then worked on those assumptions for 3 decades. And when I went on brain rehab, when the neurologist told me what actually had happened, a logical consequence was that none of those assumptions were true. And to feel safe in recovery, I had to re-understand everything. It was hard. It was hard. So when I was safe again and had a home again, and had gotten off the streets and establishing care, and I was learning, got formally diagnosed with autism, was formally diagnosed with PTSD, had been formally diagnosed with TBI, and began learning about my neurodiversity. I wanted to get grounded in my recovery, and I found a sponsor, and we went through the steps again, much more carefully this time. And it helped me to get a really solid sense of my understanding of what my recovery was about and why and how it worked. And I didn't know if giving myself to my approach to recovery would yield a workable life, but I didn't have any other thing that I could do. I needed authentic recovery, because I knew that my understanding had been incorrect and I didn't have a new one to put in its place. When I found the different diagnoses for my conditions, I brought them to my sponsor. I started bringing them to the rooms, and I quickly found the response that these things are outside issues. Go find outside help. A painful reality was that although professionals could tell me the names of my conditions, in the very next breath, practically, they each independently said, we've never met somebody who has autism and aphasia and TBI and PTSD. We don't even have science for this. There was no care I could find for autism because and TBI, because in New York State at that time, if I had fallen into care after the age of 22 and was locked on off with some mental health track for billing for mental health care. The therapist that specialized in autism needed to bill Medicare under the Office of People with Developmental Disability track. There was also a TBI track. These were separate insurance tracks, so I couldn't get care. I couldn't find neurologists who would work with both autism and TBI. The doctors we found that worked with autism wouldn't take TBI. The ones that worked with TBI wouldn't take with autism. And the ones that worked with both only worked with children, and that was our world. There were no support groups. I didn't understand how to network things. And my approach to autism is not based on social language. It's based on aphasia, which is solitary. So I was in the unfortunate position of having to grapple with recovery, but not being able to take it to the 12-step rooms that I had known for decades because nobody there could relate to the experiences I was having sober. To them, this was an outside issue. And then I had these things that they were labeled as outside issues for which there was no outside help. And I had to continue recovering anyway. And but my sponsor, and working through the steps, we got to the end of it. And it gave me a really good, solid sense of my own recovery, my own, where my addiction, alcoholism, how it arrived, what it meant to come out of my autistic experience and that trauma experience. And at the end of it, she said, you're going to sponsor other people. And I said, you're out of your mind. Nobody wants to talk to a crazy person like me. But as it happened, I started sharing my story in the rooms just when asked. And I began speaking about addiction, alcoholism from an autistic perspective as a person who'd been sober for a long time. And I did get asked to sponsor a couple of people. And I started working with them for a couple of years, and they were both neurodiverse. And what I've come to understand is that very often the needs of a neurodiverse person in recovery, they can have barriers to recovery for the same reasons I did. Their neurodiversity may be unique, individual, but the barrier can be the same. And the problem involves a sort of neurotypical assumption that a person can get sober or clean by learning to relate to themselves the same way that they, at the same time as learning how to relate to the group. I found as a neurodiverse person, I needed to have a way of first working out how to relate to myself in terms of my unique, special, neurodiverse qualities and get grounded in that solidly. Understand my powerlessness, my unmanageability, how it felt. I needed, for myself, I needed to have a sense of my problem being beyond what I could solve cognitively because it involved things that I couldn't cognate about. I needed to have a grounding and safety in that before I could work out how I wanted to integrate into the rooms so that I could understand how to express myself and be relatable. And what I found is that it's perfectly doable. That if a person is first given the support to work through the steps to relate to themselves, it's an I program rather than a we program. Once they develop independence in recovering their ability to relate to themselves in terms of their own addiction, they have a chance at learning how to relate to the rest of the world. That's the nut of it. See you next time.